Meanwhile, here are some tips for a better and smoother webinar experience. Make sure your system or computer isn't updating, syncing or downloading large files, as this will take up large amount of internet bandwidth, which will slow down the internet connection. Close any programs that are running in the background. Before we start the webinar, here are some of our housekeeping rules. Please note that all attendees have been muted and video disabled. Should you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please keep your comments in the chat positive on the topic of the webinar. Should you encounter any technical issue during the session, try to log out and log in again. If you require further assistance, please contact the event organizer. Please note that photography in the form of screenshots and video recording will be engaged in the webinar. Images and video recordings will be used for publication, publicity and other related use. Remember to fill up the post-event survey at the end of the session. We value your feedback. Do note that CPD hours are awarded for this event. Please log into IHRP profile to clock your CPD hours at the end of the webinar. Thank you for your kind attention. The event will be starting shortly. In the meanwhile,
good morning, everyone. Thanks for all the early greetings. It's so nice to hear from you. My name is Wendy from the Professional Practices and Certification team at IHRP. And as part of our efforts to bring to our HR community timely updates and meaningful learning opportunities, we are very pleased to partner with TAFEP, the Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices, for this webinar on HR strategies for successful flexible work arrangement from guidelines to action. I'm really heartened that this topic has garnered so much interest, and we have now about 400 of you who are online from our IHRP community, from TAFEP's community, and many of you who are following us on our socials. So thank you very much for taking the time this morning from your busy schedule to dial in. Now, as part of the Tripartite Guidelines on Flexible Work Arrangement Requests, TGFWA in short, come into effect December 1st, HR practitioners play a critical role in steering your teams for the smooth implementation of FWA. Today, we're delighted to have with us our fireside chat speakers, Adrian and Pearl, our moderator, Julie, and all three with extensive HR experience in strategic workforce planning, organizational development, operations and processes, and they represent the manufacturing, maritime, F&B, hospitality, and professional services sectors. To kick us off, Judith Alagirisamy from TAFEP's Programs and Capability Development team will be sharing with us broadly on the upcoming TG4 guidelines. Judith is a trained work-life consultant who develops resources and conducts training on the sustainable implementation of FWA. Judith is a firm work-life advocate and believes that work-life harmony is an integral part of building healthy communities and resilient individuals. Now, before I pass over to Judith, let me very quickly cover some webinar housekeeping rules. This webinar will be recorded and it will be made available to you on our IHRP Connect platform. Please send in questions that you would like to ask our speakers by submitting them via the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom window. Due to time constraints, we might not be able to address all the questions asked, but we will follow up with you after the webinar. And also, please refrain from taking any screenshots of the presentation or slides shared by the speakers, as materials are copyrighted. We will be sending across the materials to all of you who have indicated your interest in the survey form. And we will ask that you do not forward or redistribute these materials. And thank you so much for your kind understanding. Thank you for being with us here this morning. And with that, I would like to pass over the time to Judith.
So good morning, everyone. Today we'll begin our webinar with a sharing on the Tripartite Guidelines on Flexible Work Arrangement Requests. or TG4 for short. As Wendy mentioned, my name is Judith and I am from the Program and Capability Development team at TAFEP. So let me begin with a really quick introduction to TAFEP, which may be familiar or unfamiliar to some of you. So the Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices was set up in 2006 by the Tripartite Partners, Ministry of Manpower, National Trades Union Congress, and the Singapore National Employers Federation to promote the adoption of fair, responsible, and progressive employment practices. So the Tripartite Alliance Limited is made up of 3 organizations. We have the Tripartite Alliance for Dispute Management, or TADEM for short, that offers advisory and mediation services on matters such as salary disputes. WSHC is a statutory board that seeks to raise workplace safety and health standards across workplaces in Singapore. And of course, we have TAFEP, last but not least. So what do we do at TAFEP? TAFEP is essentially a recourse and resource center for fair and progressive employment practices. At TAFEP, we want to ensure that companies like yourselves are fair, responsible, and progressive. And why do we do this? Because we see that to help employees to have a healthy working environment, and as a result, this will help organizations to thrive. TAFEP, as I mentioned, serves as a resource and a recourse center. We have tools and resources to support employers to have better workplace practices. And we also support individuals as a recourse center when they encounter workplace discrimination and approaches for help. Without any further ado, let's dive right into the topic at hand. So when we talk about the Tripartite Guidelines on flexible work arrangement requests, we first begin by looking at the work-life landscape in Singapore. What are the key trends shaping the way that we work? One prominent trend that you might have noticed in your own organizations is really that of an aging population and workforce. In 2012, about 1 in 10 Singaporeans were aged 65 and above. Now, when we fast forward to 2030, 1 in 4 of us is going to be aged 65 and above. And these folks are going to be in our workplaces as well. Today, and increasingly, more of us will have to juggle caregiving responsibilities while working as well. We also observe that work-life expectations and needs of our workforce are changing. Based on a report by NTUC, we see that one of our youth's top concerns when entering the workforce is to achieve work-life harmony. Women workers are also more likely than men to leave the workforce for caregiving reasons. Flexible work arrangements are therefore an important initiative to help Singapore to optimize and supplement our local workforce potential in the long term. Employers who implement FWAs well, we have seen, also benefit as they will be able to hire from a wider manpower pool, retain talent, and enable a more engaged and productive workforce as well. In fact, having FWAs is probably no longer a good to have, but a critical aspect of any organization's business and talent strategy. If you are looking for case studies, right here, what we've shared with you is just some of the key observations that we have seen in successful organizations that have implemented FWAs sustainably over time. If you're looking for more case studies and examples of these companies, you can also find these on our website at www.tafep.sg. Now we'll take a quick look at the Tripartite Guidelines on flexible work arrangement requests. Now, earlier this year, when it was first announced, there was a lot of buzz around the topic of FWAs. So today, I'd like to share with you what is the intent and purpose of the Tripartite Guidelines on flexible work arrangement requests, and what role can it play in supporting organizations in FWA implementation. The Tripartite partners have long recognized the potential benefits of FWAs for both employers and employees, and have been supporting FWA adoption through the years. You'll see on the screen in front of you incentives, recognition of employers with strong work-life practices, including flex, and various community initiatives have been introduced. But really what we have observed is nothing accelerated the adoption of flexible work arrangements quite like the COVID pandemic. Now, in the post-COVID era where we are now, the aim is really to retain the good progress in FWA adoption, the positive practices and results that organizations have seen, as well as the learnings from implementing FWAs during the pandemic. A A tripartite work group was formed last year to develop a set of tripartite guidelines on flexible work arrangement requests. The guidelines will take effect on 1st December this year. The work group, which was co-chaired by Minister of State Gan Xiao Huang, NGC Director Yeo Wan Ling, and SNEF Council Honorary Secretary Edwin Ng, excuse me, consulted extensively with employees, the unions, employers, and HR practitioners. The consensus quite early on was that we should not mandate FWAs or set hard targets. Tripartite partners have recognized that there is a spectrum of businesses, service types, and sector-specific needs, which will vary widely and serve different segments of the economy. This also includes essential services. Ultimately, for FWAs to be successful, it must make business sustainable. It does not make sense to require businesses to offer FWAs even when it negatively impacts their business and could negatively affect employment prospects for individuals as well. So there is truly no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to FWAs. So employers should therefore continue to have the prerogative to determine the work arrangements ultimately. The main aim for the guidelines is to establish the right norms around requesting for FWAs and assessing these requests as well. It aims to enable employees and employers to have constructive discussions so that both sides can work out FWAs that are mutually beneficial. The tripartite partners also recognize that trust and communication on both sides is key to making FWAs work. So some of the key considerations that were put into place when designing the tripartite guidelines are that 1, we wanted it to be easy to use for both employer and employee. We wanted employees to know that it's not something very complicated and onerous with a lot of barriers for them to put in their request. So really a simple way for them to request FWAs when they require it. We also recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all model. So different companies have asked us in previous briefings and webinars that we've done, how do I do this? Must I offer more types of flex? Must I offer more of a certain kind of flex than I currently do? What if I have less of some types of flex and more of others? And some things simply work better, in my organization, and I can't offer certain types of FWAs, for example. Now, all of these will be fine if it makes business sense for your organization. You, as the employer, are in the best position to judge what works best for you. We also recognize your prerogative to decide ultimately on the FWA request. So if the nature of the job for the employee and the FWA they are requesting for is not well suited, you as the employer should be able to explain why this can't be done and have that dialogue with your staff. But we also hope that you will consider alternative arrangements for your employee as well to meet this very real life requirement and request that they have brought before you. For example, are there some adjustments that can be made to accede to some of these requests? At the end of the day, we do want for both employers and employees to have a reciprocal situation with mutual trust and not barriers. In summary, the guidelines do not require employers to approve all FWA requests. Rather, it governs the process for requesting FWAs. It requires that employers properly consider employees' formal FWA requests, and employers must consider these requests based on business grounds, such as job requirements and the impact to business productivity. Saying that there's no HR, for example, to deal with FWAs would not be a reasonable basis to reject a request. If there is an existing FWA request process, whether formal or informal, your employees should use this process stipulated by the employer to request for FWAs. To be clear, the formal process for requesting FWAs, as recommended in the guidelines, will be useful mainly for organizations that today don't have any process in place yet for employees to request FWAs. In the end, what's more important is really for your employees and employers to be able to discuss and land on arrangements that provide a win-win outcome for the organization as well as your people. Just a quick note that all firms are covered by the Tripartite Guidelines on flexible work arrangement requests, and all employees who have completed probation, are also covered. So we do recognize that new employees that are still under probation may benefit from more regular working arrangements for onboarding, training, and fostering team rapport. Hence, these under probation are not covered, and we leave employers to decide whether to exercise flexibility for this group. Employers may also decide on the format and template to help employees in making a formal FWA request. Now, what you see before you is really this minimum list of requirements that is required from employees in order to make and put forward their formal FWA request to you. And you can find all this information and more on our website, where we have the full guidelines as well as tools and templates to help you. So this is what a formal FWA request process under the Tripartite Guidelines will look like. The employee will need to submit a formal FWA request in writing with the relevant information provided. Upon receipt of the request, employers then need to consider this request properly, focusing very much on the factors that relate to the employee's job and any impact on the business or the employee's performance. A written decision on the request must be provided to the employee within a 2-month period. In practice, steps 3 and 4 is something that is usually taken together as you have the dialogue with your staff. Because if the assessment is that the FWA request cannot be approved, then it will kickstart the conversation about alternative arrangements that may take place as well. What happens when an employer and employee cannot come to an agreement or mutual understanding? So if the employee feels that their request may be resolved through other channels, and what they need to do is really to address it through internal grievance handling procedures in place, which means each company should have their grievance handling processes in place as well. Sometimes, misunderstandings do arise due to a lack of trust or communication, or potentially the lack of due diligence in the processes that we talked about earlier. So this is also a point for employers to take note of. Now, I also want to highlight to you that, what happens if the employer is not in line with the Tripartite Guidelines on flexible work arrangement requests? This is a question that we do get. Is the employer going to be taken to task if they don't adhere to the guidelines? Now, TAFEP takes an educational approach in educating employers to adhere to the guidelines by getting you to attend, our corrective workshops and providing advice on how you might adjust your practices. Now, where TAFEP will step in is we will assess all complaints, including anonymous ones, and we'll follow up with employers where there is a real basis to do so. That is, there are some identified actual TG4 breaches, for example, where you don't have a way for your employees to make a formal FWA request, or you don't get back to their formal FWA request within the 2-month period, or provide them with a proper reason for declining an FWA request, for example. Okay, so where relevant, TAFEP will then come in really to advise the employers. Our role here is really to support you to have the right processes in place, again, as I mentioned earlier, to build that mutual trust and not barriers with your employees. So we will support you to think about how to review your FWA requests in accordance with the TG4 and align your processes with it. Now, where TAFEP will not come in, just to highlight, is individual grievances from your employees. For example, if they're just simply not happy or comfortable with the reasoning that is given for why an FWA request has been rejected, but the company has followed, the guidelines very closely and adhered to it. In those cases, we will ask the company, advise the employee to go back into the employer and speak to them and try to resolve this, amicably within the organization. So with that, I'd just like to wrap up this introduction to the TG4. If you're looking for further information or want a more in-depth look at the guidelines as well, you can go to our website, www.tafep.sg. We have free self-help resources and more in-depth briefings to support your organization as well. And with that, I'll hand you back over to Wendy. Wendy, please.
Thank you so much, Judith. Thank you for putting it very succinctly, in a nutshell, what TG4 is. Up next, we are very excited to have with us our fireside chat speakers to share on how FWA looks like in their respective organizations, the lessons they have learned over the years, and tips that you can take back to your teams after this webinar. Before that, just please allow me to share a little on our speakers. Pearl Wee is director at Keystone Cable, a leading Singapore-based cable manufacturer and supplier for the regional markets. As part of her portfolio, she oversees human capital development strategies for the company. Pearl has also been very instrumental since the early days of IHRP, serving on IHRP board and with our assessment and insights committee. On top of that, Pearl has contributed in numerous IHRP projects over the years. Our next speaker, Adrian Ho, is an IHRP certified senior professional and has been a HR practitioner for the last 27 years. He's currently the HR manager for Dorsett Singapore and has recently successfully rebranded an existing hotel to Dorsett Changi City Singapore, all within 2 months. Along with his team, he's formulated necessary HR policies and formed operational teams while imbuing the right culture for team stability and job satisfaction. Our moderator for today, Julie Lee, is also an IHRP certified senior professional. She's a seasoned HR professional with over 3 decades of experience in MNCs, Big Four firms, and startups. Currently, she's an IHRP HCDT assessor and associate consultant, as well as founder of Exilia, a HR consultancy practice providing fractional CHRO as a service and HR advisory services. With that, I would like to welcome our moderator and our speakers to kickstart the chat for today.
Thank you, Wendy. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and for spending time with us. So, in line with the topic, now COVID has normalized flexible working. Having experienced flexibility during the pandemic, employees no longer settle for the pre-pandemic level of one way of working. Many people are more likely to prioritize work-life balance and well-being these days. Now, we have read that Singapore is one of the most stressed societies in the world, and the government is trying to improve things by introducing more flexible work and encouraging employers to provide help for those who need it. So let's look at some data. Earlier this year, Randstad Singapore survey has published, just for the Singapore piece, that 2 in 1 expect flexible work to continue post-pandemic. 46% felt that hybrid work is non-negotiable. And 49% would consider leaving their jobs if employers ask them to spend more time in the office. Now, I have heard that some companies say it is near impossible to implement flexible working due to the nature of the business, example, manufacturing and hospitality. The employees are required to be on site and at the forefront. Now, today, we have 2 very experienced HR practitioners, Pearl and Adrian, from these 2 sectors to shed light on the possibility of flexible working and share what they have implemented in their organizations. Before we start, let's run a poll to see where things are today at your organizations. Are you already practicing flexible work arrangements of some sort today? Could we have the poll, please? Excellent. Okay, looks like a lot of people, a lot of you here, and a lot of organizations are very much prepared to move forward and adopt these flexible work arrangements. And that is very, very good. Excellent. All right. Can we have the second poll, please? In the second poll, we are looking at whether you are already practicing. So you have a process, whether you have a process in place. Oh, look at that. This is really aligned to the first one. No, wait, too fast. Okay, so we have about 60% that already have a process in place for employees to ask for flexible work arrangements, whether formal or informally. Great. I see Kitty Wong raised her hand. Kitty, do you have a question? No? Okay. So maybe you could leave your question to the end, right? I would, in the interest of time, I think we should get going. So it looks like a lot of us are very much ready to adopt this, and about 60% of you is still putting a process in place. So here's the first question. I'd like to invite Pearl to share her experience in implementing flexible working at Keystone Cable. Could you share with us the common requests for flexible working at Keystone and the kind of flexible work arrangements that you have rolled out? Pearl.
Thank you so much, Julie. Hi, everybody. Thank you to IHRP TAFEP for this session today to share our Keystone story. I had prepared a couple slides to take us through, so I'll talk a little bit about who we are to set the stage, why we do FWA, and then some of the FWA practices that we have. So my name is Pearl. I'm director at Keystone Cable. At Keystone, we are a cable specialist. So we've been manufacturing cables in the north part of Singapore for about the last 34 years now. And we have 150 employees in total. This is roughly about 1/3 are in production, 1/3 is in logistics and delivery, and then another third are in corporate, so in the office setting. So next slide, please. So I shared about those two stats, about 34 years old and about what our breakdown is, because then it talks about why we implement certain FWAs at Keystone. First of all, we have a very multi-generational workforce. Our youngest candidate in the company right now is 17. The oldest on the shop floor is 74. And our average age in the company is 40. So this is also the sandwich generation where they need to take care of elderly parents and the young children as well. So that forms a basis. Next, talent crunch. I think many of you before this webinar would have heard of Dorsett Singapore, would have heard of Dorsett and know about these wonderful hotels, but very few of you would have heard of Keystone. And I think that's the challenge that we have. We are a very hidden product. Cables are things that you don't see. So our brand is hidden. It's very hard for us to outreach to candidates. So that's also why FWA has been important. The third reason is we pride ourselves being a family-based culture. And that is something that we want to be able to bring that warmth to the workplace as well, to let our employees have a feeling of belonging and feel like they're being cared for. So what I've said so far sounds fine and dandy, but I think it comes back to, at the same time, it's not like we can offer an entire buffet of FWAs because we're still very operations heavy. I shared about 2/3 are very site-based work, and even the office supports this operation as well. So there are some FWAs that's harder than others for us to implement. Next slide, please. So on tackling the multi-generational workforce, I would like to split between short-term and long-term. Short-term meaning the time-bound arrangements. These are normally the need-based type that we grant our employees. So for instance, we may have managers who need to take their spouse for medical treatment for a couple months, or we have young mothers that just need a little bit more support past the maternity, where they need to leave work a little bit early. So that's an example of time-bound, but we normally would ask what would be the time arrangement that is needed to support them. The next one is on staggered hours. I'm not going to push into this because I think most of you would have some form of that. But the interesting thing for us is that actually most of our people start at 8 o'clock because it's shift work, it's production, they're handling from the night shift to day shift, and the logistics as well. So most start at 8. We do have some examples of 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. But I think the idea is that people who start there, they're usually not as interactive as they need to be with other people, right? So there is a little bit of siloness in their work that allows that spread. Then the third one, this is part-time work, is what I would like to talk a little bit more about, because this has been kind of our secret sauce in FWA, right? So you notice I have it in both multi-generational and talent crunch. So part-time work, I'm just going to highlight 2 examples of one in the factory, one in the office, and as well as being their age group. One is a senior and another is kind of the sandwich group that I talked about. So the first one in the factory, I have an operator that has been with us for over 30 years now, 67 years old. So she is thinking about how to structure her work life a little bit more, right? But she still wants to continue to work. So instead of giving her an operator role, we kind of moved her times to 12:30 to 5:30 instead. And during the day, she would go to the community club and, do her exercise and community gatherings. And then she'll come from 12:30 to 5:30 to focus on our recycling bit. So we had to redesign a little bit of her role. So less so on the machine interaction, but a little bit more on the recycling part where it's still really needed for somebody to help with the recycling bit, but it's not so people dependent, next step dependent. The other example that I had in the office is our actually HR manager who has been with us for 20 years now. So he is in the sandwich group where he wanted to retire early to take care of a young nephew and as well as the elderly parents. But he has so much institutional knowledge of Keystone that it would have been quite a pity to just say, okay, thank you so much over the years and bye. So I really, really wanted to keep him. And instead of him being in HR where there's so much interaction and there is a lot of time sensitivity to that. So we converted his role into an office manager instead. So he comes in from 9 to 3 and he does the office management bit, but it's been so tremendously helpful because given that he has all this knowledge for us, he's able to negotiate our telco contracts, things that still need to be done, submitting things to LTA, for instance, right? So super useful. So that's where the other example is. Then to address the talent crunch, we do have examples of this is talking about like bringing in new talent. And I don't know how many SMEs are out there in this webinar, but if you're like me or like us, you do have some roles that are so lean, we only have one person doing it. But at the same time, having only one person do it is quite intense. But at the same time, we don't need two because that would be too much. So that's where we managed to hire some of these part-time work. And one example I have is in the accounting department. We hired a PWD who is visually impaired, but she can help from 8:30 to 12:30 thereabouts, where she does some of the basic accounting. And because of that, our accounting exec can then take the time to learn from the accounting manager as well, to learn a little bit more. So to me, it's also kind of a talent pipeline building where I can then get my accounting exec to learn a bit more than he would have been if he has the entire portfolio to himself. Another example, we actually interestingly kicked off FWA even before I knew what FWA was, because we have a lot of employees who have young kids that are graduating secondary school or ITE, poly, and during the holiday they needed work as well. So suddenly, I have a lot of next gen students that are working at my place. So last year alone, we have 5 employee next gen that were working here part-time. And it was really nice to be able to have them work on projects which otherwise would have been put on hold, right? Some of these projects that they could help do. Finally, on remote work, I think hopefully I've shared enough that ours is really operational based. So having remote work is not easy for us. That's why a lot of it is based on the ad hoc requests and time bound as well. But we do have examples of flexi time, where I do have cases where I have interns that have worked with us in the past. And even though they're back in school now, they will continue to work on gig work, for instance. So that's 100% remote. We don't need them to come in. But these are the things that we need to consider. So in the interest of time, that's where I have at the moment. So I'd like to pass that to Adrian and address any questions you might have after. Thank you.
Thank you, Pearl. Adrian, over to you. Could you share with us the common requests at Dorsett and what kind of flexible work arrangements that you have implemented in Dorsett?
Sure. Thank you, Julie, and thanks, Pearl, for sharing Keystone Cable. Okay, maybe I share a bit of the background of Dorsett, just in case some of you do not know. Dorsett is actually a brand that is parked under the Hospitality International, Dorsett Hospitality International. And for us, we actually operate side by side with 3 other brands, which is Dow by Dorsett, D Collection, and Silker. And currently, we have over 50 hotels spread out over in 4 key cities, which is Singapore, Malaysia, China, and Australia. They also operate 2 other strategic partnerships, which is under TWG, operating in Europe, the Transworld Hospitality, and Agora International, which has a few hotels over in Japan. So Dorsett Hospitality International, which is a parent company based in Hong Kong. So you see the operations all around the world. And maybe we zoom into Dorsett itself in Singapore. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so our flexible work arrangement journey, like what Pearl mentioned earlier, actually started way before we had this TGFWAR journey. What happened was, during COVID times, we had quite a lot of lockdowns and we had quite a fair bit of quarantine, and a lot of other measures that was implemented. And therefore, we actually had to have quite a few people of our staff actually being seconded out. And along the way, we had retention issues also. So I think we do not actually encourage that. Of course, every organization will always value their staff. But during the COVID days, it was a necessary step in order to continue the business going, right? So therefore, after the COVID ended in 2022, we bring back the business, and therefore we also realized that we had quite a fair bit of shortage in staff. So that was how we actually started our flexible work arrangements, and it started off with venturing out, like what Pearl implemented. It was actually more geared towards part-timers. So we took part-timers in as our contingency plan, because it's difficult to hire, people who are willing to work full-time. And along the way, we realized that there was actually quite a fair bit of people who, due to different circumstances, whether is it their family or whether is it their other work commitments or whether their life stage, they are keen to actually work with us, but they're unable to commit full-time. And therefore, we started introducing this flexi time also. Our operational staff, like a lot of businesses, they were doing staggered hours and all that. But at the same time, we also want to go one step further, in a sense that do we actually really need people to work so many hours? Can the work be actually compressed? So we were also looking at flexi load, because at the end of the day, you only have so many people with your workforce, but your workload has to be done. So there are certain timings of the day where you don't really need so many people, and there are certain timings that because for us in the hospitality line, the guests will usually check in at a certain hour. So that is the time when we need extra hands and legs to ensure that the guests actually move. So that's where also we look at productivity. Usual businesses, they will actually have fixed working hours. So for example, like 8 to 4:30, 9 to 6, that kind of thing. But during your working hours throughout the whole day, there are certain hours that you tend to be there just because you are required to work, right? You're not exactly productive. Of course, you can find things to do, but does it actually, contribute towards the business itself? So that's where we also balance the workload itself. People who are able to do other stuff, then we will actually, during those free hours, we'll get them to do other stuff. For example, like helping out reservations, in keying in some of the entries, checking the entries, and maybe volunteering over to other departments. So that is how we actually introduce this flexi load also, to help boost up productivity where it is required in other departments, but not so required for that timing in your own department. with this flexi work arrangement, we also realized that staff are actually more happy because for them to actually make a choice, whether do I want to come to work at a certain timing, or if there is actually a live event that I need to take time off, and maybe I can have 2 hours early off, where they can actually voice this kind of request, and we are willing to consider, that actually makes their engagement level to the organization higher. They feel that the organization is not so uncaring, and that's where we find that it actually helps the very first thing, which is retention. So just to highlight, from the beginning of this year until now, we actually do not really have many turnover, because a lot of organizations, they have the same pattern over and over again. You know, the moment you give your AWS and your bonus, and then you'll find that people take it and they say, okay, you know, let's try another organization. So we're quite proud to say that from the beginning of the year until now, we only have 10 voluntary resignations against a total workforce of 60. So I would think that it is doable for organizations to try and keep their people as long as they are willing to listen. Of course, we are saying that it's not necessary to accede to every request, but it is important that you let your staff know that we are willing to listen, and based on case-by-case basis, as what this TG FWAR is all about, you will need to consider whether on a business need, will you be able to accede to such requests? So for us as a hotel, our main center of focus is actually bringing guest experience. But at the same time, we also emphasize that our staff is actually also our customers to the organization. So that's where we also want to bring customer service to our own staff. And that's where we emphasize that flexible work arrangements is still available to everyone, but of course, based on their role, based on their department, we may not be able to consider or accede to every kind or every form of flexible work arrangement. Yeah. So what has this journey brought about to us at the end of the day is we see increased engagement, better engagement to the staff. And at the same time, also, we find that staff work with us, they actually have a meaning to the career. Okay, maybe we go to the next slide. Okay, so maybe just to, not to have a spoiled record playing over and over again, this is our journey so far, is that I think I've seen one Q&A question inside the Q&A is that, must the request be formal, and what actually is informal request? So this is what we also worked out, is that especially for operational staff, because our workforce, there's about 60 to 70% of them are being operational. So for example, if let's say, there's an event that they need to attend, they are requesting for maybe the next shift to have 1 hour early off, 2 hours early off. Those can be done at an informal basis because it's a one-off and also it's not frequent. So we are encouraging staff to put in a formal request only when they actually need to have a prolonged period, and also the request for flexible work arrangement, right, is going to be disruptive to their own department. For example, operational staff that want to request work from home because maybe they have a aged parent that maybe, touch wood, fell down at home, and they have they're arranging for a caregiver, but in the meantime, the caregiver is not in yet, so someone has to be at home to make sure that nothing goes wrong. So, operational staff working from home, I think that is impossible for a lot of organizations. So, in that sequence, then you will definitely need to make a formal request, because firstly, it's going to be disrupting to your own work, your original role. Secondly, there's going to be a time frame to that, right? So that will actually touch on also the second part, where we are saying how many people actually needs to be informed of this request. So we have also implemented an informal way that if it is operation departments, they need to submit this request first to their own department heads and then copy to HR so that at least HR is aware that there's such a request and we can keep track of the time of response. Then, of course, the request must always be including a reason for it, how long it's going to be, and what is the contact in case if, let's say, the flexible work arrangement is going to be work from somewhere else. How are we going to contact you in case of emergency and all that? So what we always encourage for people who are responsible for taking in this request is they must go back to the requester. Don't leave it hanging in mid-air and let the person guess what exactly is going on. Is it a yes? Is it a no? Is it going to be half approved because maybe the time frame is too long? So what we are also seeing is that a lot of line managers, they are coming back to HR to discuss this. So this is actually a real life experience, is that line managers are not so aware of their legislative coverage, meaning that they are afraid to make certain decisions because they are not sure whether, does it comply with the guidelines, or is it going to be, a rejection straight out because they have the right to do so. So this is what I can share so far of our experience so far. And I think like what Per have also, we have a case, a real life case where our own staff is having a family issue and they have requested for work from home. So we did not fully accede to this request, but instead we negotiated with the staff and say, well, out of 3-4 days, you need to be in the office at least for 1 or 2 days. So that means we grant you 50% working from home, but 50% you still have to come back to office. And they added on another thing that the staff did not request is we are willing to negotiate the working hours. So we have also introduced the flexi time inside, even though the staff did not request originally. Yeah, so this is, I think, the takeaway that I can provide is that keep this flexible work arrangement request to be the flexible as what it is, But the key thing is that why we introduce this. We actually introduce this for better retention of the staff and also to show and demonstrate to our own staff workforce that as HR practitioners, as business owners, we do care about them. And as far as the business is concerned, if it is not really affecting the business, we would definitely consider the request. Yep. So I think with that, I come to an end to my presentation. And maybe back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Adrian. That is very, very informative. I have something around the impact. So I recall you say, after you have implemented this flexible work arrangements, that your engagement has gone up and your retention has also gone up. That is excellent. Is that over a period of 1 year, 2 years?
Yeah, that's over a period of 1 year.
Okay, excellent. Same question to Pearl. I'm very curious about Keystone. What is that impact, in terms of the after you have implemented this versus before? Maybe you could share a little bit.
For us, I think, I think it's quite specific though, because for instance, on the HR becoming the office, I think the impact is more about if he had really just retired, then I would really have to scramble and look for another person. And, so there's a lot more continuity. And so it's driven by necessity, I would say. Yeah, and the impact has been that business can run smoothly.
Okay,
as usual.
so it's
Yes.
really about business continuity, and you don't have the risk of losing very valuable knowledge, and you continue to retain the staff, and the staff can continue to spread the knowledge, uplift the team, and help to coach and mentor the rest.
So that's one of them. I think the other one about the talent crunch, the fact that I can use some of the part-time work, it means that our work can be better too. So for instance, in my marketing department, I only have one marketing exec at the moment. but we have other things that we want to do, right? So all these gig work that we bring the part-timers in, they're
Yes.
really supplementing and making it look like we have more than one person doing the job.
That's really good to hear. A lot of companies that I've talked to have experience where, you know, they don't want to increase the overheads, and when they are implementing projects and all, they expect the current same staff to take on the extras. So it's really heartening to hear that Keystone has taken on gig workers, contingent workers to help supplement so that time can be free up for them to be able to do what they need to achieve. Wonderful. So back to you, Pearl. I'm very interested to know, how do you manage fairness, you know, in situations where some employees have to work flexibility, and there are gig workers as well. And then how do you manage that in terms of the fairness of, you know, people saying so and so is on project but has the flexibility, but I don't, you know, I have FaceTime, I'm here, maybe I'm more productive. What's your views on that?
So I think fairness has to be looked at. I believe in the rather than fairness, I believe in fair process. And what I mean by that is, for instance, on topic of fairness, it's going to be hard for me to have to offer the same type of FWA to a production operator versus my sales coordinator, right? Because by the nature of the job, they're interacting with the machines and everything. It's just different. I wouldn't be able to grant, for example, even temporarily work from home for production operators. But I think where the fairness comes in is that within my sales coordinators, that or similar roles, that if I offer one based on a particular need base, that is the kind of consideration that I would give for other people in the same role. I think that's what I kind of mean by the fair process, that it's not because of is this particular person, and that's why.
Thank you, Pearl. Adrian, I have a question for you. Now, in the case where flexibility is being afforded to someone, it takes empowerment and trust and maturity as well, not just in the organization culture, the managers as well, but on the part of the employees as well. It takes a lot of commitment, you know, so that the employees do not think that it is one-sided. I'm just using it to fully my advantage, you know, but the commitment is less, right? So I imagine there might be cases maybe you have encountered. How do you address, you know, and mitigate the risk of employees abusing?
Yeah. Okay. So first, I think we need to, you know, address the elephant in the room, right? So employees always think that, you know, with this introduction, they would actually become a default position, right? So I think we have to be quite clear in our communications to all staff, is that flexible work arrangements, firstly, is upon request, right? And secondly, it is not a right, right? It is actually a privilege. So privileges can be given, but upon abuse, privileges can be removed also, right? And I believe what Pearl touched on is very accurate. It is not about the fair end result, right? It's about the fair process, meaning that today, if a manager abuses this right, the manager will be subject to the same kind of discipline action or even more, because the role and the responsibility, of course, the higher it goes, the more responsibility you take, right? But the process of it going through, it must be the same. It must have equal treatment. So staff should actually understand this right from the beginning, is that if, let's say, they make a request and if there is any form of abuse, then of course, you know, HR will take it independently and we will do necessary investigation. And if it is confirmed that there is an abuse of the privilege that is given, then it's either because we must also address this through the disciplinary or grievance handling process, right? So it can be either cut short halfway and being removed, or HR can decide together with the manager in charge that, okay, flexible work arrangement is coming to an end, but once it ends, if this staff requests again, we may not give this based on the past experience. So this is how my area would actually recommend this to be handled.
Thank you, Adrian. So in just to add on to that piece, a follow-up question would be, you mentioned about a fair process rather than fairness on the treatment. The process would actually give you the treatment, right, to ensure that it is fairly run. So my question, Adrian, is what kind of how do you equip your managers, because they would be managing a team, that comprises of people on flexible or on part-time versus the full-time. How do you equip them, right, to even manage grievances and all that? What were the things that you put in place, to ensure that the protocol is properly and fairly executed?
Yeah. So usual grievance procedure or discipline handling, it's usually there's a few steps. So firstly, all employees have an avenue to raise their concerns. Likewise, for discipline handling, the department heads will usually have either supervisors or they themselves would actually face this form of discipline from their own staff, and they must have a process, meaning that they need to fill up the investigation form. They need to actually sit down with the staff. That means their supervisors also need to sit down with the staff. There's always a counseling first, and then followed by HR intervention. So we will actually step in once there is a written warning that's to be submitted. Whereas for grievance handling, I think it is more understandable that staff may not be comfortable approaching the department heads even, because sometimes the grievance is actually involving the department heads. So our procedures is that they have the right also to come to HR, right? But they must, we always believe that there is also a possibility that there might be some misunderstanding. So that's where sometimes when staff approach HR in terms of grievance, we also inform the staff that to clarify some of these grievances, we may have to go back to the department head. And therefore, if the staff is uncomfortable, then we would have to document it down, and we have to understand why are they uncomfortable for us to go back to the department head. Because we always tell the staff that to protect them before we finalize and say that this grievance is real or not, we will anonymize them. We will not inform the department head who actually raised this grievance. But it is to establish that this grievance is real. Because we have come across, for HR practitioners, we have come across cases where it's just probably, the staff don't like certain supervisors, and they are trying to find fault, and they find that approaching HR is an easy way out, rather than a head-to-head conflict. So for HR, we need to also be a very unbiased party. We need to recognize that there might be certain truth to it, no matter how uncomfortable. But we have to handle it tactfully also, and time-based. We must understand that there are certain things that is not advisable to drag on for too long, because it will affect the morale of the other staff. So that's where also in part of our handling grievances and discipline issues, we will always set a rough timeline of within a week, not more than a week, to resolve it.
Okay. So it sounds like you have educated the managers on what the grievance process is, so that they know how to respond and react. Thank you for that, Pearl. A question for you. Apart from educating the managers who have to manage a group of flexible people who are working flexibly, gig workers or part-timers, how do you prepare them in advance on managing, this, or even to lead a team that comprises of the mix of people? Because I imagine, grievances will be there, but what other things did you educate the managers on how to lead this, properly? Pearl.
Yes, thank you, Julie. Maybe before that, I love this conversation because I'm learning from Adrian as well, taking down notes. His is so structured. Yeah, thank you for that. I think to take a step back for our case, to add to it that what Adrian hasn't yet, what we look at is I think it's important to have a general guideline as well on what the company is comfortable in terms of offering, right? So we do have a small write-up that's in our employee handbook as well. It's just a guide, kind of derived a little bit from the FWA guide, but kind of operationalized in our own, right? So I think that gives a sense to the line managers as well about what are some of the FWA practices that we could potentially follow up with, right? So that kind of gives them, I think that would help inform them. This is on the request side. And then on the managing bit, usually before we bring in these gig workers, I think that's where we would already have to buy in, because these gig workers are those that are coming in and joining their team rather than someone being converted as a full-time into a gig, which is still possible. So we have for example, interns that I talked about, right? And then they will come back, but we would always discuss with them first before we bring in such gig workers that will help them, because it essentially is to elevate that team's output regardless. Yeah.
Thanks. So I imagine some questions in there. I have not taken a full look at it, but I would like to ask a question here. So in regards to the group who is on part-time or on a maybe, okay, so we have a few things that popped up. So there is flexi time, there's flexi load, there's also job redesign, there's the part-time. How do you tweak the performance measure on this individual? Let's not talk about the contingent workers. Let's talk about the permanent employees. How do you tweak the performance measures on them? And how would that be any different from people who are working full-time?
Maybe I answer this first. Short
Okay.
answer, no difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
How so?
Okay, because firstly, they're all full-timers. It's just that their working arrangements for a short period of time is actually on flexible work. So be it flexi place or flexi time, but they are still expected to deliver the same set of KPIs compared to those people who are working on site. So I think that is where the fairness comes in. You requested for a different form of working arrangement for that period of time. And for the business, the expectation is still there. You are expected to deliver regardless of where you are, regardless of what time you're working. So that's where we do not differentiate the appraising of the work delivery, whether you are on site, whether you're working as normal, or whether you are on some form of flexible work arrangement. Yeah.
Okay, so that's provided they are all within the same department, and the kind of flexibility that can be given to them, you have already taken into consideration the business needs, and there will be little or no disruption to the outcome that they need to deliver on and achieve. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah. And
Yes, that's
therefore
correct.
you can then continue to measure them in the same way, that there will not be anything necessary. There's no necessity to any tweak it or even to change it. Okay, got that. What about you, Pearl? Would that be similar to what Adrian has done for Dorsett as well?
I think similar. So they still have the same performance appraisal. It's possible that this person may be above target individual previous years, but because of certain things that happen and cannot, because one of the fields that we have is also the quantity, the quality, accuracy of work. So we would still have to measure it objectively. And if the person can still achieve the above target, then that's above target. But if based on those measurements for that year, it's more of an on target, then that's an on target. I think, again, it's about the fair process of the measurement as well.
Okay, thanks,
Uh,
Pearl.
Yeah, maybe I want to add on one point is coming to this TGFWAR, my own reflection is that at the back of the mind, everyone must always remember that when we go into employment, we actually sign a letter of employment, right? And this request is actually short term. So for HR practitioners, if you ask me personally, if they, for a permanent reason, they want to change their form of employment, then I would execute not a TGFWAR, but rather a change in terms and conditions of employment. So that, to be fair also, since the terms and conditions have changed, then our appraising of the staff, the KPIs and everything, the performance should be realigned. So I think that would be a better way to manage if, let's say, the circumstances have changed and it's going to be permanent.
So
Yeah,
I'll
I
add to
think-
that
yeah.
too. Sorry, because the example that I shared on the operator, for
Yes.
instance, then we would no longer subject her to, say, a quality incentive, for instance, right? Whereas in the production operation, they do have that added incentive if the quality meets a certain mark, etc. Yeah, so I agree with Adrian, just to add on that. So on the short term wise, there's no change. If it's just a time bound, you're still subject to that. But if it's a long term, like our redesign, then yes, it'll be new terms.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that. Because I was also thinking if the whole job has changed, like in the case that you mentioned, Pearl, then if we're flexible with the change, then we should be flexible with the performance measurements as well. So thank you. All right. In the interest of time, I think we want to quickly, but before we move to the Q&A, I know we only have 1 minute left. Just one question for each one of you, right? For those companies that have not started to prepare the process. So a lot of them, they are practicing a little bit already, but if they want to implement the process, what is that one advice that you would give them to look into first? So Pearl.
Thanks, Julie. I think in the poll that you had, I was really surprised that actually 85% have already implemented.
Yeah.
And my advice really to the remaining 15 is that actually you might be surprised if you can do a stock take. When we were thinking about FWA, we didn't realize that we had some of these as well until I did a stock take. So do a stock take first, you'll be surprised, because the importance of having a stock take also means what your organization at this point is comfortable with. And after you do a stock take, I suggest to talk to the business leader that's in charge of HR, or the business leader that in charge of the company. What kind of parameters are they comfortable with given the business operations circumstances? Then finally, I would say start small, right? I think that what Adrian and I have both shared about is that I think what has worked for us is the time bound. Right, so when you have something that's time bound, it's not so risky that it cannot be changed. So having a time to it will help. So it's a 3-in-1.
Yeah. So the stock take. So what did you stock take on? Is it did you run a survey to find out, what sort of flexibility are people asking for? Is that a stock take, or is it a stock take about what kind of requests have come through in your departments? You are polling the business rather than the full white employee population.
So a stock take, meaning for example, even on the staggered hours, before I just thought, oh, actually, I think most of our guys are just coming in at 8, maybe at most 8:30. And then when I did a stock take, I said, oh, there are some that comes in at 7 as well. I mean, we negotiated that a while back because their role allows it. But just having that big picture overview on what's already being done in the company that you may not even realize it's under FWA. That's what I'm saying. Like, at least then we know, say, hey, why were we able to grant it for the 7? Because that works out. 7 o'clock, he leaves for home early and he has the rest of the day to himself, right? But then that informs why you were able to, and whether that could be implemented for other people as well.
That's great. Adrian, do you have anything further to add on to what Pearl has just shared?
Yeah, I think similar to Pearl, the stock take is critical, I would say, because for FWAR, the business takes precedence, right? So definitely we need management buy-in, the very least. right? So the comfort level of what kind of flexible work arrangements is management agreeable to. So also is a gentle reminder is that this guideline does not ask you to implement all forms of flexible work arrangements, right? It's what suits the business, and like what Per mentioned, what actually is the most requested kind, and what actually the business is all the while doing it is just probably informally. So that is the first step. Second is definitely whether, will there be a proper training, I would say, is that because in my case, I don't know about Per, but in my case, most of the requests actually do not start with HR. We delegate this authority and decision making to the line managers. So we also have to train the line managers of what exactly is important to the business and what can be allowed if there is a request that comes in. So training to the line managers is probably the next step that they want to consider.
Right. So when you talk about training, I am just going to just predict that what you're saying is you are giving them the guidelines on what's reasonable within the business that they could afford, and what kind of flexible work that they could actually give to their employees. So it's a kind of training so that they work within the set of principles that you have set, for Dorsett. Okay, thank you so much. We need to move into the Q&A now. So let's look at the webinar chat group. What do we have here? Okay, so there's a question there. With effect from 1 December 2024, is it mandatory for employers to have a formal policy document for employees to send in formal FWA requests? What if company now allows employees to request for FWA, but there isn't any policy on this? May I ask if anyone would like to have a try like this? Judith, maybe from TAFEP's point of view?
Under the Tripartite Guidelines, what you're required to do is to have a way to manage formal FWA requests, which means you must have a way for employees to make formal FWAs requests to your organization. Now, if you have a standard that is already working for you, a process that is informal and is already working for you, you can actually already go ahead and continue with that. Yeah, so the guidelines are not meant to be onerous or put undue administrative burden on the employers, but rather it is a baseline and it's there, as I mentioned earlier, to support employers who don't have anything in place yet. So if you have a process that you currently have, so that's what I'm hearing from the question, you have a process in place, it's informal, but it's working for you, then you can go ahead and use that.
Thank you, Judith.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm back. I would like to ask the next question to the speakers. What I've done is I've run through many of your questions and I've consolidated these questions. The first one is FWA a temporary arrangement or is it a permanent arrangement? That's the first question. Second question, what if the employee is not performing? Are we still obligated as an employer to extend FWA arrangement?
Okay,
Okay,
maybe I take this one. Flexible work arrangements, in my interpretation, is yes, they are temporary. They are not meant to be permanent. They are not meant to be back to default position of your employment. So that is a temporary arrangement, but how long it's going to be, then it will depend on the requester, what they actually indicate there. It's going to be 1 week, 1 month, few months. Yeah, so I would encourage that you make that as a requisite for the person that is requesting this arrangement. Second, I would take this more carefully because for this FWAR, it is actually a request meant to address some of the events that is ongoing. It could be personal health issue, it could be personal commitment, it could be family requirements and all that. So I would rather say that the performance of the staff may be affected because of this flexible work arrangement being implemented during that time. And maybe either we cut short the flexible work arrangement or we try and change some of the arrangements. Unless you are saying that, this stuff, even before having this flexible work arrangement, the performance is really not there, then I would say that, you should actually use your performance management procedures instead to address this issue.
Thank you, Adrian. So to add to that, I think for us, FWA is more of a need base rather than a personal preference, because I say need based because we still have the business ops that's important to consider. And that's why it's a lot of it is temporary, but as the cases that I shared as well, there are some cases where we will convert them to permanent, but that's a different thing. That's really talking about a redesign and talking about a different contract altogether. So temporary, I agree with Adrian. I think that there needs to be a time bound. And that said, now that I mentioned it's based on need base, so if it is if it's an employee that is not performing prior to it, because it's a need base, we would still grant because it's based on taking care of the elderlies or etc. So that's something that going back to the fair process statement, right? It's not that we would then say no because you haven't been performing. But like what Adrian says, then the performance is based on the yearly appraisal and everything, and then the performance corrective action, etc. So that's where we're going to tease this into two separate things.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, I have a next question. I think Pearl and Adrian, you both have touched on this, but maybe we can expand a bit more. And I believe it's in relation to the topic on fairness. How should we manage employees who are unable to request for FWA due to their nature of their jobs, particularly in light of the fact that other employees can request for FWA?
Okay, I go first. I believe this question arises from operational staff. So with managing operations, I think it is a question of whether do we have enough people and can we have bandwidth to accommodate to that staff request. So there's a lot of factors that come into play. So what is the flexible work arrangement that is requested? How long is going to be? And are there backups while this person is taking this flexible work arrangement? Is there someone that is going to be there in case if anything happens? So I don't have a straight answer to that, but rather I think transparency, communication, and also the willingness to say the right thing rather than say something right. If it cannot be accommodated for that group of people, I think it is on HR's part and also the management's part to be daring enough to tell them that unfortunately, because the business is run in such a way, we will not be able to afford and give this group of people this form of flexible work arrangement. Yeah, it just has to be that way.
So I'll take that on too. For us, I think that most of our operational staff, the ones that really can't do this FWA, a lot of them are foreign staff, foreign workers who are coming to do the operator role, etc. So what we've done, because of course, they cannot work from home from China, Malaysia, etc. on the machines, but we do consider their personal circumstances in that sometimes when they need to go back because of an emergency, a stretch that they need to take care of things maybe for a few months. And we had done that before where we would let them then go back and we kept their pass, right? So that's something we've done. And of course, they'll finish off their annual leave and it goes into unpaid leave. Typically, in our case, in operations, right, you typically don't encourage unpaid leave, right? Because that's something which we don't want it to just, you know, we need to know where you are, right? Because we need you on site. But in such cases, we would grant the unpaid leave based on what they require, and then they come back and they can work again. So I'm talking specifically on the foreign workers, because in my operations, at least in our experience, that's the bulk of it.
Thanks, Pearl. Since we're on the topic of foreign workers, I'm going to jump to another question where someone asked, are work pass holders, example, EPS pass work permit, eligible for applying for FWA, particularly those who are assigned from overseas group companies under international assignment arrangement? So I'm going to attempt on this question. So if let's say it doesn't really matter what kind of employment status they are in particular, when you talk about the employment types, whether they are work pass holders or PRs or Singaporeans, if they are here to fulfill a role that they are assigned to do and they are paid to do that role, it doesn't matter whether the flexibility is applicable to them or not, because it would be, because they are part of your workforce. And how do you decide on whether you would afford them the kind of flexibility? It will depend on how much flexibility your business is able to accommodate, right? And have that discussion and have that establish the understanding. Is it going to be permanent? Or is it going to be time-bound, short-term? And what is the real need? If the role requires them to be on-site, like, for example, Keystone's Cable's case, or even Dorsett case, then unfortunately, maybe it's about staggered hours, maybe it's about compressed work, and really looking at those possibilities to make it work. If it really can't, then I'm afraid difficult conversations will need to happen, right? Or even would giving them a bit of time off help them to resolve whatever they need to resolve, and then they can come back full time, things like that. So a conversation is needed to make it work for both sides, because the commitment has to be from both. It cannot be one side wins and then the other side doesn't win, right? It has to be both, and business needs consideration is an important piece here. The next question: can we use performance or work attitude to reject a flexible work arrangement request? Pearl, would you like to take this?
Can we use
work performance or work attitude? So maybe the person's attitude may not be so good, or the performance is a bit questionable, or maybe just inconsistent, right? Can we use this as a means or reason to reject a flexible work request?
I think that's where it comes back to the fair process I was talking about. That again, what is the guideline for us internally? It's really about the need-based portion of it too. So even if it's there's a work attitude, if the person has that need, we will still look at it. Yeah, and maybe to add a bit about the previous question as well on the pass, is the same thing, because all our employees, then again, if I look at the fair process, it's not looking at your nationality or your work pass, for instance, right? It's really based, if you have that need, then we would take our time to spend some time to look at it. So I would say that's also where the difficulty is. You do have to put in some effort to look at these individual cases.
Thanks for that, Pearl. Because of the interest of time, so I'm going to jump through. I'm going to try to get as many interesting questions answered as much as possible. So there's a question around, for a foreign employee that requests work from home because they want to stay longer in their home country, they will mix leave and work from home. Do you think this is a reasonable request? If this is considered, you know, would it be fair to others who are based here? Adrian, would you like to take this?
Short answer, no. Because in the first place, they were already on leave, right? So I would think that this is actually more of an extension of leave. I wouldn't grant it because there's no basis for it.
Okay, And I think it makes sense. I'm just going to quickly share my experience in my last job before I started on my own consultancy firm. So I've got two requests. One is I'm going to go to Bali and have a holiday, and I'm going to have extended because it's more relaxing for me to work there. So I'm more productive. So there's a request like that. So I'm just going to share this. What did we say? We say no. Exactly to Adrian's point, you're on leave, you should take your leave, right? And why I said that, because this particular, again, business needs. So this particular individual is part of a project where everyone is delivering. And there are some employees who are working remotely, but imagine this, what kind of message you are sending to the rest of the team if you as a manager were to approve this. I think this is a part where the perception could have an impact on the entire project team. Then I have another request where someone asks, okay, I'm going to be home in India. I've not gone back for a longest time, because of COVID, etc. So the decisions based on that could revolve around a few things. So the first one is you have to think about the tax impact on the organization. Do you have an entity over there? And you have to be compliant to the country's legislation and make sure you don't run afoul of the law. If you don't have an entity there, you might run into a permanent establishment kind of an issue with corporate tax and also the person's individual income tax, because they may be doing work that is considered revenue generating for your entity in Singapore. So the tax part is a very important piece. Okay, I'm going to turn this back to Wendy.
Thank you very much, Julie. So we have just one precious minute before we end. We might just extend it since so many of you are still here. We're asking for you to now give your feedback for the webinar today and let us know how we did. Let us know what other topics you would like us to bring to you. And while you're doing that, we would love to take a few more questions. So maybe let us go over the questions again. And while you're putting your response for the survey, we're just going to take maybe another 2 more questions, if that's okay with the speakers.
Okay. Yeah, 2 more questions is definitely possible. Let me just scroll and take a look at some of the questions here. Okay, so I think this is quite simple. If FWA is not mandated, why is this made mandatory to have guidelines and involvement of TAFEP, assuming company do not have a process in place? I think in all fairness, I would not say it's mandated. You really need to look at the business needs, and you really also want to consider how you attract and retain people. Right, I'm just going to again go back to the part that I mentioned earlier around the data. Okay, so what happens is pandemic has normalized the way of flexible working, which was seen to be impossible, right? And post-pandemic now, employees will not settle for anything that was pre-pandemic or even pandemic, really. So how do you intend to attract people? And then secondly, also give consideration to the fact that Singapore is very highly stressed. And when people do not have a way to help them manage their work life, and work life may not be 9 to 5, it could be in different ways, as we have talked about the different guidance that's given for flexible work. When people are burnt out, it would be very disruptive to your business as well. So that's addressing on the part of burnout. And burnout can come in many different forms. I don't have the ability to leave work early because I need to get this done, but I also need to rush home to fetch my children from childcare, as an example. That is an added stress, like it or not. Maybe now you can manage this, you could have help, but maybe there'll be a time where your employee needs the extra help and the extra support to help them get through. It could be an old, senior family members at home that needs the additional help. Okay, I see Yuan Ting raised her hand for a really long time. I'm not sure whether is there a question there. No? No? Okay, sorry. All right, okay.
So now it's 12:02. Thank you all for staying over. It's a good thing. I think our speakers have been so wonderful. So maybe just have a quick summary, Adrian and Pearl, if you have any last thoughts to share with our participants who have logged in today.
Do I go first?
Yeah,
Sure.
please do. Please do.
Okay. Well, I think at the end of the day, from now till 1st December is actually quite short. So in case if you have not done anything yet, I think just now we did share a bit of I would say advice is that do a quick stock take and put up something first. Okay, so how we actually did it is that during the COVID, because there is actually a requirement for non-essential people to stay away from the workplace. So we at that time already had a policy, but it was actually named as flexible, no, it was not flexible work arrangement, it was actually work from home. So we modified that and we got approval to re-implement it as flexible work arrangements. So this is actually a shortcut way, So relook at what you have currently and modify it to adapt to these current guidelines. And I'm sure it will actually work because I hope all HR practitioners understand that there's a difference between a guideline and a law. So this guideline is for everybody to adopt. It is good practice. It is responsible practice. And at the end of the day, whatever that you have up there is actually to achieve better retention and to position you as an employer of choice. So I would also encourage everyone to take a look even beyond what is already there in the guidelines. Yeah, what works for you actually. Yeah. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Adrian. And
I
Pearl,
think for
last word?
my side, this FWA word aside, right? I said that we are doing a lot of these things because it stems from a necessity to want to retain staff and want to expand our talent pool. So I think we can look at it from that lens instead, right? And then look back at what kind of tools what can you do within the organization. And the second thing is probably I feel that all the cases I mentioned, there hasn't been one cookie cutter for all our different cases. So it's really personalized, but having the time bound plus personalization, I think that does help with the engagement and creating that sense of belonging that we wanted in the company. Then last of all, I feel like having a webinar like this was wonderful, but I'm learning so much from Adrian as well. But I feel like, even the time bound thing, that was one of the wise words I heard from a fellow SME business leader, and that's kind of what we're implementing as well, right? So I think continuing to expand and chat with people that are similar, even in different industries, but even Adrian is very different, but because he's in hospitality and manufacturing, he can share so freely with me as well. I take a lot of structured learnings from that too. So that's what I would suggest, the peer learning too.
Thank you so much, Pearl. Well, Pearl, Adrian and Julie, thank you so much. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our TAFEP presenter, Judith, as well as our wonderful moderator, Julie, for all the great insights and perspective that they have shared. And for those who have not done the feedback, I would appreciate if you just take 30 seconds to let us know your thoughts. And we would love to find out what more can we do for you, what more can we curate for you come 2025. Now, on behalf of TAFEP, IHRP, and our guest speakers, thank you for being such engaging participants. There are many questions that we haven't answered, but we are going to try to consolidate them all and then come back to you on Connect, IHRP Connect, to share with you some of the answers. So do check out IHRP Connect and do follow us on LinkedIn. And we hope to see you at our next event. Thank you so much again and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.